Sarah Mitchell's ancient Honda Civic sputtered and wheezed as she accelerated through the yellow light, her heart racing faster than the engine. The digital clock on her dashboard blinked 7:52 a.m. She was already running late for her first day at her new job, and 8-year-old Tommy still needed to be dropped off at school. "Mom, I forgot my science project." Tommy's voice cracked from the back seat, clutching his backpack with white knuckles. Sarah's stomach dropped as she glanced in the rearview mirror at her son's worried brown eyes, so much like his father's, the man who'd abandoned them 3 years ago without so much as a goodbye. "Honey, we can't go back now. I'm starting at the accounting firm today and I can't be late." The words tasted bitter in her mouth. After 6 months of job hunting, this entry-level position was their lifeline out of pending eviction. The morning fog hung thick over Seattle's downtown streets, transforming brake lights ahead into hazy red orbs. Sarah squinted through her windshield, where the wipers left streaky arcs across the glass. She'd been meaning to replace them, but new wipers weren't in the budget, not with Tommy's asthma medication eating up what little remained of their savings. The traffic light ahead turned red. Sarah pressed the brake pedal, but nothing happened. Her heart stopped as she pumped it again. Nothing. The intersection loomed closer, and through the fog she caught a glimpse of sleek black metal. The impact came with a sickening crunch of metal on metal. Sarah's body jerked forward against her seatbelt, and Tommy yelped from the back seat. When the world stopped spinning, she found herself staring at the crumpled hood of her car, steam rising in the cold morning air. The vehicle she'd hit was a Rolls-Royce Ghost, easily worth more than she'd make in 10 years. "Tommy? Tommy, are you okay?" Sarah twisted around, her hands shaking as she reached for her son. "I'm fine, Mom," he said, though his voice quavered. "Just scared." Sarah's relief was short-lived as she watched a tall figure emerge from the Rolls-Royce. Even through the fog, she could tell his suit cost more than her monthly rent. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money, his broad shoulders squared as he assessed the damage to his luxury car. Alexander Rhodes had been on his way to close a $500 million deal when the accident occurred. As CEO of Rhodes Enterprises, one of the largest technology companies in the Pacific Northwest, his time was literally worth thousands of dollars per minute. He should have been furious about the delay, about the damage to his car, about the entire situation. Instead, he found himself transfixed by the woman who stepped out of the Honda, her auburn hair catching the weak morning light. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was a fierce determination in her eyes as she checked on someone in the back seat before approaching him. She walked like someone who carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, but refused to let it break her stride. "I'm so sorry," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "My brakes failed. I tried to stop, I swear. I have insurance, but—" She trailed off, knowing her basic liability coverage wouldn't come close to covering the damage to his vehicle. Alexander raised an eyebrow, taking in her worn coat and the runs in her stockings. "Are you all right?" he asked, surprising himself with the gentleness in his voice. "Yes, I'm fine, but my son—" She glanced back at the Honda, where Tommy was now pressing his face against the window, his breath fogging the glass. Alexander's expression softened. "How you have a child in the car?" He immediately pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my personal medical team. They'll be here in minutes." "No, please," Sarah protested, panic rising in her throat. "We can't afford—" "I insist," Alexander cut her off, already dialing. "And it won't cost you anything." He paused, studying her face. "I'm Alexander Rhodes." Sarah's eyes widened with recognition. Everyone in Seattle knew that name. "Sarah Mitchell," she managed, feeling suddenly light-headed. "And I'm already late for my first day at a new job. And Tommy's late for school, and now I've crashed into probably the most important person in Seattle, and—" The tears she'd been holding back started to fall. Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp handkerchief, offering it to her with a slight smile. "Take a breath, Miss Mitchell. Everything will be fine." He glanced at his watch, made a decision, and then looked back at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Let me handle this." Within minutes, the street was filled with activity. Alexander's security team arrived first, followed by medical personnel who insisted on checking both Sarah and Tommy. A tow truck appeared to collect Sarah's Honda, and a sleek town car materialized to serve as Alexander's replacement vehicle. "Mom, are we in trouble?" Tommy whispered as a doctor checked his pupils. Before Sarah could answer, Alexander knelt down to Tommy's eye level. Not at all, young man. In fact, I think this might be the luckiest accident I've ever been in. He winked at the boy before turning to Sarah. Ms. Mitchell, about that job you're late for. Where is it? Peterson and Associates, the accounting firm on 5th, Sarah replied, her stomach churning at the thought of how late she now was. Alexander's smile widened. As it happens, Peterson and Associates handles some of my company's subsidiary accounts. Let me make a call. Sarah watched in astonishment as Alexander stepped aside and had a brief conversation on his phone. When he returned, there was something in his eyes she couldn't quite read. It's taken care of, he said, but I have a different proposal for you. Rhodes Enterprises is currently looking for an internal auditor. The position pays considerably more than Peterson and Associates, and it comes with full benefits. He paused, his expression growing serious. I've learned to trust my instincts in business, Ms. Mitchell, and something tells me you're exactly what my company needs. Sarah stared at him, wondering if she was still unconscious in her car, dreaming this whole scenario. Mr. Rhodes, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not looking for charity. This isn't charity, he replied firmly. This is business, though. He glanced at Tommy, who was now proudly showing his doctor his partially completed science project. Perhaps we could discuss the details over dinner. The morning fog was finally starting to lift, and with it, Sarah felt something else lifting too, the crushing weight of constant worry that had been her companion for so long. She looked at Alexander Rhodes, this man who could have ruined her life, but instead seemed determined to change it, and found herself nodding. Dinner would be nice, she said softly, and for the first time that morning she smiled. Alexander Rhodes had built his empire by recognizing valuable opportunities when they appeared. As he watched Sarah gather Tommy into her arms, her strength and grace evident in every movement, he knew that this car accident might just be the most valuable opportunity of all. The gleaming elevators of Rhodes Enterprises stretched from marble floor to vaulted ceiling, their polished surfaces reflecting Sarah's nervous expression as she straightened her new blazer. 1 week had passed since the accident, and her life had transformed so completely, it felt like stepping into someone else's story. Alexander hadn't just offered her a job. He'd arranged for a car service to take Tommy to and from school, insisted on advancing her first month's salary so she could move to a safer apartment, and somehow managed to expedite her employee benefits so Tommy's asthma medication would be covered immediately. It was overwhelming, wonderful, and terrifying all at once. "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell," the security guard greeted her with a warm smile. "Mr. Rhodes asked that you go directly to his office when you arrive." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Their dinner the previous week had stretched for hours, conversation flowing as naturally as the wine. Alexander had listened intently as she shared her journey. Her ex-husband's gambling addiction that had left them in debt, her determination to give Tommy a stable life, her night classes to earn her accounting degree while working 2 jobs. But there was still so much unsaid, so many reasons why any relationship between them could never work. The executive floor was quiet when she stepped off the elevator. Alexander's assistant, Patricia, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, gave Sarah an appraising look. "He's waiting for you," she said, her tone neutral but her eyes curious. Alexander stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, his tall frame silhouetted against Seattle's skyline. When he turned to greet her, Sarah caught her breath. Even after their dinner, even after their daily interactions over the past week, his presence still affected her like an electric current. "Sarah," he smiled, the formality of his suit contrasting with the warmth in his eyes. "Thank you for coming up. There's something I need to discuss with you." Her stomach tightened. "Is everything all right?" "That depends," he replied, gesturing for her to sit. "Our internal security team conducts background checks on all new employees. Yours came back this morning." He paused, watching her carefully. "They found something interesting about your ex-husband." Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. "What about him?" "It seems he's back in Seattle." Alexander's voice was gentle but serious. "He's been asking questions about you and Tommy at your old apartment complex." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "That's impossible. He disappeared 3 years ago." We hadn't heard anything. "There's more," Alexander continued, moving to sit beside her rather than across the desk. "The gambling debts he left behind, they weren't just to casinos. He borrowed money from some dangerous people, Sarah. People who might think you have access to those funds now that you're working here." Sarah stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "I should have known it was too good to be true," she whispered. "All of this, the job, The apartment, you—" She turned to face him. "I'll resign immediately. I won't bring this trouble to your company." Alexander was on his feet in an instant, crossing the room to her. "That's not why I'm telling you this." His hands found her shoulders, steady and warm. "I'm telling you because I want to help. Because I—" He stopped himself, seeming to wrestle with something. "Because I care about what happens to you and Tommy." "You barely know us," Sarah protested weakly, even as she found herself leaning into his touch. "I know enough," he replied. "I know you're brilliant at your job. You've already identified 3 major discrepancies in our subsidiary audits. I know Tommy is the kind of kid who spends his allowance buying food for the stray cat behind your new building. And I know that when you smile, really smile, it feels like watching the sun come out after a storm." Sarah's heart thundered in her chest. "Alexander—" "Let me finish," he said softly. "I also know what it's like to have people only interested in you for what you can give them, to wonder if anyone sees past the surface to who you really are." His hands slid down her arms to take her hands. "When you crashed into my car that morning, you didn't see the CEO of Rhodes Enterprises. You saw the mess you'd made and worried about your son and your job. You were real in a way I haven't experienced in years." A knock at the door interrupted them. Patricia entered with an urgent expression. "Mr. Rhodes, the board is waiting in the conference room and—" She hesitated. "There's a man in the lobby insisting on seeing Ms. Mitchell. He claims to be her husband." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Alexander's grip on her hands tightened. "Ex-husband," he corrected firmly. "Patricia, call security. I want him escorted from the premises immediately. Then contact our legal team." He turned back to Sarah, his expression fierce. "I meant what I said about helping. Will you trust me?" Looking into his eyes, Sarah saw not pity or obligation, but something deeper, something that made her pulse race and her fears recede. Still, she had to know. "Why? Why would you do all this for us?" Alexander's response was interrupted by another knock. This time it was Tommy's school on the phone. Her son was in the nurse's office with an asthma attack, and his rescue inhaler wasn't working. Sarah reached for her purse, but Alexander was already moving. "My helicopter can have us at the school in 7 minutes," he said, reaching for his coat. "Patricia, reschedule the board meeting. Family comes first." The word family hung in the air between them as they rushed to the elevator. Sarah knew they needed to talk about her ex-husband, about the complications he brought, about the growing feelings between them that neither could deny. But in that moment, watching Alexander take charge with such natural concern for Tommy, she realized something that thrilled and terrified her. She was falling in love with him. What she didn't know was that Alexander had already fallen for her that first morning in the fog, and every day since had only confirmed what his heart had recognized instantly. As they stepped into his private elevator, he made a silent vow. Whatever troubles her past brought, whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them at her side, not because she needed him to, but because he needed to be there. The elevator doors closed on their reflected images, the billionaire CEO and the single mother, an unlikely pair brought together by a faulty brake line and fate. Neither could have guessed that the real test of their growing bond was about to begin, or that Sarah's ex-husband's return was only the first piece of a puzzle that would challenge everything they thought they knew about each other. The private hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beep of Tommy's heart monitor. Sarah sat beside his bed, watching his chest rise and fall, each breath a little stronger than the last. The severe asthma attack had scared them all, but the specialists Alexander called in had stabilized him quickly. "He's going to be fine," Alexander said softly, entering with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Sarah, his fingers brushing hers. "The doctors want to keep him overnight for observation, but they're optimistic about the new treatment plan." Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully, breathing in its warmth. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done today." "You don't have to." Alexander pulled a chair closer to hers. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. About your ex-husband, Michael." The door opened before he could continue. A nurse entered, followed by a doctor Sarah hadn't seen before. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Dr. Roberts. I need to discuss your son's condition privately." Alexander stood. "I'll give you some privacy." "No." Sarah caught his hand. "Please stay." The word surprised them both, but felt right. The doctor glanced between them, then consulted his tablet. "Mrs. Mitchell, we've reviewed Tommy's medical history, and something concerning has come to light. The prescription inhaler he's been using, it's counterfeit. What? Sarah's grip on Alexander's hand tightened. That's impossible. We get it from the hospital pharmacy. The serial numbers indicate it's part of a batch of counterfeits that entered the market 6 months ago. These fakes contain only a fraction of the active ingredient. That's why Tommy's attacks have been getting worse. Sarah's world tilted. 6 months ago was when she'd started getting the prescriptions filled at a new pharmacy, one that offered steep discounts to help with her financial struggles. The pharmacy Michael's cousin owned. Alexander's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. "Sarah, my security team just sent me something you need to see." He handed her his phone, displaying security camera footage from the hospital lobby. Michael was there, arguing with the front desk staff. "He knows Tommy's here," Sarah whispered. "But how?" "Because he's been watching you," Alexander said grimly. "Sarah, what I tried to tell you earlier, our investigation found that Michael's gambling debts weren't the real story. He's part of a pharmaceutical fraud ring. They've been selling counterfeit medications across the West Coast." The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow. He used me, used Tommy. All those times his cousin offered to help with the prescriptions. She stood abruptly, rage replacing shock. "He's been slowly poisoning our son. Security is detaining him," Alexander assured her. "The FBI has been building a case against the ring for months. They just needed proof of direct patient impact." "Wait," Sarah turned to him slowly. "How do you know about the FBI investigation?" Alexander's face changed subtly. "Because Rhodes Enterprises has been working with them. We've been tracking counterfeit pharmaceuticals through our medical technology division. When your background check flagged Michael's connection, I recognized his cousin's pharmacy as one of our suspects. So that's why you hired me." The words felt like ash in her mouth. "To get to Michael?" "No." Alexander reached for her, but she stepped back. "That's not—" "Ms. Mitchell," the doctor interrupted. "We need to start Tommy's treatment now." Sarah straightened her spine, pushing her emotions down. "Of course, whatever Tommy needs." She turned to Alexander, her voice cold. "I think you should go. Sarah, please let me explain. My son nearly died because his father cared more about money than his life. And now I find out that the man I was falling in love with—" She stopped, fighting tears. "Just go." Alexander stood rooted to the spot, watching the walls go up behind her eyes. Everything he'd feared, losing her trust, losing the connection they'd built, was happening. But he couldn't tell her the whole truth, not yet. Not when it might put her in even more danger. "I'll have security posted outside," he said quietly. "You'll both be safe." Sarah didn't respond, turning back to Tommy's bed. Alexander lingered in the doorway for a moment, watching her stroke her son's hair, before forcing himself to leave. In the hospital corridor, he pulled out his phone and dialed a secure number. "It's Rhodes. Michael Mitchell is in custody, but we have a problem. The cousin isn't just a distributor, he's the connection to the cartel. And now they know we're onto them." He paused, listening. "Yes, I understand the risks. But I won't let anything happen to them, even if it means—" He glanced back at Tommy's room. "Even if it means losing her." Inside the room, Sarah fought to keep her composure as Tommy stirred. Her son's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her with difficulty. "Mom," his voice was weak. "Where's Alexander? He promised to teach me chess when I feel better." Sarah's heart clenched. Despite her anger and hurt, she couldn't deny how much Alexander seemed to genuinely care for Tommy. The way he'd rushed them to the hospital in his helicopter, how he'd entertained Tommy with stories while they waited for test results, the genuine fear in his eyes when Tommy's breathing had worsened. Her phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "The man you know as Michael's cousin isn't who he claims to be. If you want to know the truth about why Alexander Rhodes really came into your life, meet me in the hospital cafeteria. Come alone." Sarah stared at the message, her instincts warring. Every fiber of her being wanted to stay with Tommy, to ignore the cryptic text and the complications it promised. But if there was more to the story, if Tommy was still in danger— "Sweetie," she said softly, "I need to step out for just a minute to talk to the doctor. The nurse will stay with you, okay?" Tommy nodded sleepily. "Can you ask Alexander to come back? He makes you smile." Sarah's throat tightened as she kissed his forehead. "Get some rest, baby." In the hallway, she nodded to the security guard Alexander had posted, then headed for the cafeteria. Her mind raced with questions. Was Alexander's interest in her truly just part of his investigation? Was there more to Michael's involvement than even Alexander knew? And most importantly, Could she trust either of them with her son's life? The cafeteria was nearly empty at this late hour. In the far corner, a woman sat alone, her face half hidden by a curtain of silver hair. As Sarah approached, the woman looked up, and Sarah gasped in recognition. Patricia, Alexander's assistant, smiled grimly. "Sit down, Ms. Mitchell. There's something you need to know about your ex-husband, and about Alexander Rhodes." Patricia's hands were steady as she placed a thick file on the cafeteria table. 3 years ago, Alexander's younger sister died from complications related to counterfeit heart medication. The pharmaceutical fraud ring that provided those drugs, your ex-husband's organization was behind it. Sarah sank into the chair, her world shifting yet again. Alexander never mentioned a sister. "Emily was everything to him," Patricia said softly. "After her death, he dedicated Rhodes Enterprises' resources to hunting down these counterfeit drug operations. When your car crashed into his that morning, he recognized Michael's name during your initial conversation. But then," Patricia smiled slightly, "then he met you, and everything changed." "What do you mean?" "I've worked for Alexander for 15 years. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. The job offer, the protection. Yes, it started because of the investigation, but his feelings for you and Tommy, those are real." Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from the hospital room's nurse. Tommy was asking for her. As she stood to leave, Patricia handed her an envelope. "These are transcripts of Alexander's meetings with the FBI. Read them. You'll see that every decision he made was to protect you and Tommy, even at the cost of the investigation." The elevator ride back to Tommy's floor felt endless. When the doors opened, Sarah found Alexander in the hallway, deep in conversation with a group of serious-looking men in suits. "The cartel knows we're closing in," one was saying. "They'll try to eliminate any connections." "Sarah," Alexander noticed her, his face tightening with concern. "You shouldn't be out here, it's not safe." "Mr. Rhodes," one of the agents interrupted, "we need your decision about the extraction plan." Alexander's eyes never left Sarah's. "Get the helicopter ready." "But I won't leave without them." "That's not protocol. They're my family." Alexander cut him off. "Protocol be damned." The word family echoed in Sarah's mind as she clutched Patricia's envelope. "Alexander, what's happening?" Before he could answer, gunshots rang out from the stairwell. Alexander moved instantly, shielding Sarah as his security team sprang into action. Through the chaos, she heard Tommy scream, "Mom!" Sarah's world narrowed to that single cry. She ran for Tommy's room, Alexander right behind her. Inside, they found Michael's cousin, or whoever he really was, holding a struggling Tommy, a gun pressed to the boy's head. "Nobody move," the man snarled. "This is your fault, Rhodes, you and your crusade. Now watch what happens when you interfere with our business." Time seemed to slow. Sarah saw Tommy's wide, terrified eyes, saw Alexander's hand inching toward something under his jacket, saw the slight tremor in the gunman's hand. "Let him go," Sarah said, her voice stronger than she felt. "He's just a child." "He's leverage," the man spat. "And once he's gone, there'll be nothing linking us to the counterfeit drugs, no proof. Except this." Alexander's voice was steel. He held up his phone. "Everything you just said was streamed live to the FBI. It's over." The gunman's grip loosened for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Tommy bit down hard on his captor's hand and ducked. Alexander moved with impossible speed, tackling the man as Sarah pulled Tommy to safety. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the small room. "Alexander!" Sarah's scream tore through the chaos as he slumped against the wall, crimson spreading across his white shirt. Security and FBI agents swarmed the room, subduing the gunman. Medical teams rushed in. Through it all, Sarah held Tommy with one arm while pressing her other hand against Alexander's wound. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please, I read Patricia's file. I know about Emily. I know you were trying to protect us." Alexander's eyes fluttered. "Should have told you everything. Was afraid you'd think it wasn't real. But Sarah," his hand found hers, squeezing weakly, "falling in love with you. Most real thing that's ever happened to me." "Mom?" Tommy's voice was small. "Is Alexander going to die like Dad said I would?" "No, buddy." Alexander managed to smile. "Made you a promise about that chess game, remember?" The medical team moved in then, rushing Alexander to surgery. The next hours were a blur of FBI debriefings, doctor's updates, and Tommy finally falling asleep, exhausted but safe. Sarah learned that Michael and the entire counterfeiting ring had been arrested, that Alexander's live stream had provided the final evidence needed for conviction. Dawn was breaking over Seattle when a doctor finally appeared with news. Alexander would make a full recovery. The bullet had missed any vital organs. Sarah sat by his hospital bed, holding his hand as he slept. Tommy was curled up in a chair nearby, his own breathing finally easy with proper medication. On the bedside table, Patricia's file lay open, revealing years of Alexander's secret war against counterfeit drugs, his protection of other families, his determination to prevent anyone else from suffering Emily's fate. Alexander stirred, his eyes finding hers. "You're still here. Where else would I be?" Sarah smiled, tears threatening. "You saved my son. You saved us both. You saved me first," he whispered. "That morning in the fog, I was just going through the motions, consumed by revenge. Then you crashed into my life and suddenly I had something to live for again." Tommy stirred in his chair. "Mom, can we keep him?" Sarah laughed through her tears as Alexander reached for her. "What do you say, Miss Mitchell? Think you could tolerate having a billionaire CEO around? I come with excellent health insurance and a slightly used Rolls-Royce." "I think," Sarah said, leaning down to kiss him softly, "that would be a fair trade for crashing into your car." 6 months later, Sarah stood in front of a mirror, adjusting her wedding veil. Tommy, dashing in his little tuxedo, practiced his ring-bearer duties while Patricia fussed with the train of Sarah's dress. Through the window she could see Alexander in the garden, talking with the guests, his hand absently touching the scar on his chest, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. But they hadn't lost. They'd found each other instead, brought together by a faulty brake line and fate. As Sarah prepared to walk down the aisle, she smiled, remembering Alexander's words from that first morning. Sometimes the worst accidents lead to the best destinations. In the end, it wasn't about the billionaire CEO falling for the single mum. It was about two broken people healing each other. About a little boy finding the father he deserved. About love being stronger than fear, trust overcoming doubt, and family being something you choose. Crash by Wonderful Crash.